The bell above the door had not worked in 3 years. Marcus Webb knew this because he was the one who kept forgetting to fix it. The hinge still made a sound, a low scrape against the frame, and that scrape was enough for the regulars. They knew they were inside. They knew where to sit. They knew what the coffee tasted like before it touched their lips. Marcus stood at the entrance of Diner 44 and felt the scrape under his shoulder and thought, not for the first time, that the broken bell was probably a metaphor for something. He just could not figure out what. He was wearing a gray hoodie that his daughter Zoe had declared ugly on 3 separate occasions. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and plain. He had left his truck 2 blocks away, which was something a person only did if they had something to hide or something to learn. Marcus Webb was not hiding. He was learning. There was a difference, and he held on to that difference the way a man holds on to something small when the bigger things have slipped away. 11 years. That was how long Diner 44 had been his. 11 years of 4 a.m. deliveries and health inspections, and 1 kitchen fire that he still could not fully talk about without his left eye doing something strange. He had rebuilt the back kitchen twice. He had buried 3 suppliers and found better ones. He had trained so many cashiers that he sometimes passed them in grocery stores and had to stop himself from checking their register technique. He knew this place the way he knew his own breathing, which was exactly why he needed to see it like a stranger. Once a month. That was his rule. He came in civilian clothes, sat at the counter or in a booth, ordered off the menu like any other person, paid like any other person, and watched. He watched how the staff moved when they thought the owner was home sleeping. He watched whether the coffee sat on the burner too long. He watched whether the morning crew greeted the first customer differently from the 14th. He watched the details that got polished up the moment somebody important walked in, and the details that stayed honest when nobody important was around. His district manager, a calm man named Gary who wore the same 3 ties on rotation, called this habit eccentric. His daughter Zoe, who was 8 years old and had already developed opinions about most things, called it daddy playing pretend. Marcus called it quality rounds. He had never told a single employee it was happening. That was the whole point. He took a stool at the counter, not the first one near the door, not the last one near the kitchen window, but the third one from the left, which gave him a clear line to the register, the serving station, the front 2 booths, and the pass-through window where the kitchen sent out plates. It was a good seat, a watching seat. He had sat in it before, and nobody had ever figured out why he always chose it. The woman behind the counter came over with a coffee mug before he had even picked up a menu. That was good. That was the standard he had trained into everyone from day one. Coffee first, questions second. He did not recognize her from his previous visits, which meant she was newer, which meant she was being watched whether she knew it or not. She was maybe 20, maybe 21. Short hair, quick hands, a smile that arrived and left without overstaying. She set down the mug, filled it without being asked, and moved on. Efficient. No wasted motion. Good, Marcus thought. That is good. He ordered the number 3. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, and the coffee he already had. He did not order the special because the special changed by whoever was working the kitchen, and he wanted a baseline item, something he could measure against the last time he had sat here and the time before that. The diner was filling up the way it always filled up on Thursday mornings. Slow at first, then suddenly not slow at all. The booths took families. The counter took solo people in pairs who did not feel like talking. The corner table near the window took the retired men who came every single morning and had been coming every single morning since before Marcus had owned the place, back when it was called something else and served worse pie. Marcus watched all of it while his eggs cooked. He watched the new girl navigate a complicated order from the Booth family. 2 adults, 3 children, one of whom changed her mind twice and one of whom had an allergy the mother mentioned in a low voice that required the girl to lean in, confirm, and write a separate note on the ticket. She did all of this without once looking flustered. She did not sigh. She did not come back to the kitchen window and make a face. She just handled it and moved to the next thing. That was something. That was not nothing. His plate arrived hot. The toast was the right color, which sounds like a small thing, and is not. He had eaten pale toast at this counter. He had eaten bread that had spent 30 seconds in a toaster and called itself done. This was gold and even. and it had been pressed down properly. Somebody back there knew what they were doing, or somebody had finally listened to the laminated toast guide he had put above the toaster 2 years ago, and which he had suspected everyone ignored. He ate slowly. He had learned to eat slowly on these visits. Eating fast made him look like he had somewhere to be, and a man with somewhere to be does not sit at a diner counter for 2 hours. Zoe had asked him once why he did this. She was 6 at the time, sitting on the kitchen counter at home while he made her a grilled cheese, her legs swinging, her eyes the particular shade of serious that meant she was about to ask something she had been thinking about for a while. He had told her the truth, in the simplest way he could. He told her that when you build something, you have to keep checking whether it is still good. Not just once, not just at the beginning, you have to keep checking, because things change, and sometimes they change without making any noise about it. She had thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "But how do you check without everybody acting different because the boss is there?" He had looked at his 8-year-old daughter and felt the particular pride of a parent who realizes their child has already identified the central problem of organizational management. "You dress like nobody," he told her, "and you sit very still, and you pay attention." She had nodded. Then she told him his grilled cheese was burning. It was. He had gotten distracted. Marcus finished his eggs and held his coffee mug with both hands and watched the morning move around him. There was a rhythm to a good diner, a rhythm you could feel in the floor, and the noise, and the way plates landed on tables. When the rhythm was off, you felt that too. A plate that landed too hard. A pause between seating and greeting that stretched one beat too long. A coffee that arrived after the food instead of before. The rhythm this morning was mostly good. He had been sitting there for 40 minutes when he noticed her. She was not the new girl. She was not the woman who had poured his coffee. She was working the register at the far end of the counter, and she had been there since before he arrived, which meant she had been on her feet since the opening shift began. She was young, 23, 24, somewhere in there. Her hair was pulled back and she was wearing the standard uniform, dark shirt, diner apron, and she was 8 months pregnant. Marcus noticed this the way you notice something that stops you mid-thought, not with drama, just a pause, a recalibration. She was not moving slowly. She was not leaning on the counter. She was standing straight and working the register with both hands, and talking to the customer in front of her, with the kind of focused attention that most people only manage for things they genuinely care about. He watched her take 3 orders in a row without writing any of them down. He watched her redirect a man who had sat in the wrong section without making the man feel like he had done something wrong. He watched her catch a mistake on a receipt before the customer even saw it, fix it, hand it across the counter with a small apology, and move forward like the mistake had already been filed away and forgotten. Marcus Webb sat with his cold coffee and his empty plate and felt something shift in his chest. He had been running this diner for 11 years. He thought he knew every person on his payroll by face, by name, by scheduling preference, by whether they wanted paper checks or direct deposit. He prided himself on this. He prided himself on being the kind of owner who knew his people. He did not know her name. He had not seen her before today, which meant she had been hired during a stretch when he had trusted the shift managers to handle onboarding without his direct involvement, which he had done because he had been managing 3 other things, and Zoe had been sick twice in October, and he had told himself he would catch up on the new hires when things settled. Things had not settled. They never settled. He had just stopped checking. He looked at the woman at the register, her straight back, her fast hands, her 8 months along, and he reached for the word that fit what he was feeling. He found it after a moment. Ashamed. Not of her, not of anything she had done. Ashamed of the gap between the owner he told himself he was and the owner he had actually been for the last few months. The careful, watching, present owner, sitting at the counter in a gray hoodie. That person had not been around as consistently as he liked to believe. The man who left onboarding to other people and meant to catch up and did not catch up, that person had been around more than he liked to admit. He signaled for a refill he did not need, because he was not done watching yet. He had a feeling the morning was just getting started. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 41 years old. He had built this diner from a failing lunch counter, with 4 working stools, and a menu that had not been updated since the previous decade. He was raising a daughter alone. He had not slept more than 5 hours at a stretch in 4 years. He ordered a second coffee and settled back onto his stool. And he paid attention. The morning had barely hit 9 o'clock when the diner filled up the way Marcus had learned to expect but never quite predict. Not gradually, not in a polite single file, but all at once, like someone had tilted the street sideways, and everybody on it slid through the door at the same time. 2 booths filled together. 3 people sat at the counter without looking at each other. A woman with a stroller took the wide table near the wall that Marcus had specifically widened 8 years ago because he had watched too many mothers struggle with narrow gaps while carrying everything and saying nothing. He watched all of it from his stool. But mostly he watched her. Her name, he would learn later, was Renee. But at this point in the morning he did not know that. He just knew the face, the apron, the register at the far end of the counter, and the posture, that particular posture of a person who has decided that letting things show on their face is a luxury they cannot afford. She was still standing, 8 months along and still standing, still working, still moving between the register and the serving counter and the receipt printer, with the economy of someone who had mapped every step and was not taking any extra ones. She did not lean. She did not sit on the edge of the stool that sat near the register specifically for cashiers during slow moments. She stayed on her feet, and she stayed present, and Marcus could not tell whether this was discipline or stubbornness, or something that did not have a clean name. He watched her take an order from a man who could not decide between 2 items. This is one of the small tests of working a counter. The indecisive customer, the person who reads the menu out loud to themselves, who asks what is good, who changes their mind after the ticket has been written. Most cashiers had a way of handling this that involved very small facial expressions they believed were invisible. A tightening around the eyes, a slight forward lean that meant please finish your sentence. Renee had none of these. She waited. She let the man think. She offered one suggestion, the Western omelet, because it was made to order and he could get it exactly the way he wanted. And then she stopped talking and let him decide. He chose the Western omelet. He thanked her like she had done something for him. She said of course and moved on. Marcus wrote nothing down on these visits. He kept everything in his head, which his district manager Gary also considered eccentric, and which Marcus considered essential. Notes changed the way you observed. If you were writing, you were summarizing. If you were watching, you were present. He wanted to be present. A table of 4 came in around 9:15. 2 adults, 2 teenagers who were at that age where every movement communicated that they would rather be somewhere else. The adults ordered quickly. The teenagers did not look at the menu. One of them said just coffee, in a tone that suggested the word just was doing a great deal of work. Renee poured the coffee. She did not perform warmth at the teenagers. She did not try to coax them into participating in the morning. She poured their coffee, set down the cups without ceremony, and let them be exactly what they were, teenagers, in a diner, before 10 in the morning. Marcus respected this enormously. He had watched too many servers perform cheerfulness at people who had not asked for it. It was exhausting to watch, and more exhausting to receive. The rhythm of the morning was good. He kept coming back to that word, rhythm. A diner had it, or it did not. And when it did not, you felt it before you could explain it. In the pause between when food was ready and when it was delivered. In the slight overlap, when 2 servers reached for the same item on the service counter. In the way a coffee refill happened, just after a customer had already given up hoping for one. The rhythm this morning was good because of several people, but it was anchored, he noticed, at the register end of the counter. Renee was the anchor. She was the fixed point the other staff triangulated around without knowing they were doing it. When the morning rush hit its first complicated moment, a ticket that got entered wrong, a table that needed reseating, a phone order that came in at the worst possible time, it was her voice that handled the communication. Not loudly, not with any performance of authority, just clearly and efficiently, the way you talk when you have already decided what needs to happen and are simply informing the room. The cook's name was apparently Devon. Marcus could see him through the pass-through window, young, early 20s, still learning the difference between efficient and rushed. Devon sent out the wrong plate at 9:32. Marcus saw it before the plate hit the counter. He knew the ticket. He had memorized it when Renee had read it back to the customer 5 minutes earlier. The plate came up with the wrong side. Hash browns instead of fruit. Renee caught it before Marcus had finished the thought. She was at the pass-through window with the plate back before the customer had even looked up from her phone. Marcus heard none of the exchange between her and Devon. It was quiet and brief, and happened in the small gap between the noise of the morning. But the plate that came back out 30 seconds later had fruit on it, and Devon did not appear shaken. He appeared corrected and refocused, which was a different thing entirely. Marcus thought about the last time he had seen a senior employee cover for a new one without turning it into a lesson delivered at volume. It had been a while. He ordered a cinnamon roll he did not need because his coffee cup was empty, and he needed a reason to stay. The cinnamon roll arrived warm. This was also the standard. He had trained the morning crew to pull pastries from the warmer to order, not to let them sit under the heat lamp until someone eventually chose them. The roll was soft in the center, and the icing had been applied after warming, which meant it was still moving slightly when it was set in front of him. This was a small thing. Everything was a small thing. That was the lesson of 11 years. Everything was a small thing, and small things accumulated into the character of a place, and the character of a place was either worth something or it was not. He was halfway through the roll when the door scraped open, and a woman came in with a boy of about 5, who was wearing rubber boots that were very clearly on the wrong feet, and appeared completely untroubled by this. She took the last open booth and sat the boy across from her, and Marcus watched the boy immediately begin turning the sugar dispenser upside down, and then right side up, and then upside down again, with the focused repetition of someone conducting an important experiment. The server for the booths, a woman named Clara, according to her name tag, who moved with the slightly hurried energy of someone perpetually behind, but perpetually managing, got to them in under a minute. She had the boy's attention within 10 seconds by producing a children's menu with a small box of crayons from the apron pocket. The boy put down the sugar dispenser. Small things. Marcus watched Renee handle the register for the next 40 minutes without a single gap in her attention. He watched her remember the name of a regular without being reminded. He watched her tell a customer that the soup of the day had changed since yesterday, unprompted, because she could see the customer was about to order it based on habit, and she wanted them to know before they committed. He watched her notice that a couple in the first booth had been waiting for their check long enough that one of them had started looking around, and he watched her flag Clara without making a thing of it. He wondered how long she had been doing this. He wondered why he did not know. Around 10 o'clock, the rush began to thin. The families left. The solo counter people lingered over their last cups. The retired men in the corner had cycled through their usual topics. He could not hear them, but he had sat near enough on previous visits to know the pattern, and were now simply sitting with each other the way people sit when the talking has already been done, and the company itself is the point. Marcus looked at his watch. He had been here for 2 hours and 11 minutes. He had a meeting at noon that he could not push. He had a call with Gary at 1 that he also could not push, partly because Gary was his district manager, and partly because Gary had the energy of a man who took rescheduling personally. He also had to pick up Zoe from school at 3:15, which was the one appointment in his entire calendar that had never once been moved, no matter what was happening. He did not leave. He ordered the soup. It was not the soup he had wanted. The soup of the day had changed, as he already knew, because he had heard Renee tell the customer, but it was good. It was warm and it was properly seasoned, and the bread that came alongside it had been cut on the diagonal the way he had requested in a memo to the kitchen team 3 years ago, and which he had no idea whether anyone was still following. Apparently someone was. He sat with the soup and he thought about Renee Okafor. He did not know her last name yet, but he would. He was already certain of this. And he thought about what it meant that she had been working the morning shift at this counter, 8 months pregnant, covering for a new cook, managing a full rush with no assistant and no visible complaint, for however many weeks or months she had been doing this, and that he had been so occupied with everything above the counter level that he had not seen her until today. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the particular look Zoe got when she had been working very hard on something, a drawing, a puzzle, a story she was making up, and nobody had noticed yet. Not angry, not hurt, just a particular kind of alone. He did not like that he was thinking about this in the context of an employee. He did not like the comparison. But the mind makes the connections it makes, and the connection his mind was making right now was that people who carried things quietly, without being asked to, without being thanked for it, without even being seen doing it, those people deserved to be seen. He had not been seeing. He paid his bill. He tipped more than he usually did on these visits because the service had been exactly what it should be, and the restraint he applied to his tips during quality rounds, to stay anonymous, to stay average, felt like the wrong restraint to apply today. He stood up from the stool. He picked up his cap. He looked once more at the woman at the register. She was processing a card transaction, her eyes on the screen, her posture still straight, still present, still on her feet at the end of a rush that had lasted for nearly 3 hours without a break. She did not look up. He walked to the door. The hinge scraped. He stepped out into the late morning and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with his hands in the front pocket of his hoodie, and the sun on his face, and a thought in his head that was not quite a plan yet, but was becoming one. He had some file reading to do. He had a call with Gary to plan around. He had a 3:15 pickup that was not moving under any circumstances. And he had a very strong feeling that the next time he walked through that door, he was not going to be wearing the gray hoodie. Something about that man had not been right. Renee had noticed him the way she noticed most things in the diner, not because she was looking for anything in particular, but because her eyes had been trained by 2 years of counterwork to register the small inconsistencies before they became problems. A table where the couple had stopped talking to each other, but were both pretending to read the menu. A customer who had been given the wrong plate but was too polite to say so. A man at the counter in a plain gray hoodie who had ordered the number 3 and a cinnamon roll and a soup and had sat there for over 2 hours without once looking at his phone. People who sat alone in diners for 2 hours usually had something they were avoiding, a phone call, a decision, a version of their day they were not ready to return to. They stared at their food, or they stared at the door, or they stared at the middle distance where nothing in particular was located. This man had stared at the counter. Or rather, and this was the part that had kept the edge of her attention throughout the morning, he had stared at the diner, not at any one thing, at everything. The register, the service counter, the pass-through window, Clara's section, the coffee station, the receipt printer. Renee had been doing this job long enough to know the difference between a customer who was bored and a customer who was observing. This man had been observing. She had not mentioned it to anyone. It was not something she could explain without sounding like she was overreacting, and she had learned early in her adult life that there was a very short runway between a woman saying something is wrong and a room full of people deciding she was being dramatic. So she filed it. She kept it in the back of her mind, the way she kept everything that was not immediately useful, organized, accessible, waiting. When he left, she had watched him without appearing to watch him. The way he paused on the sidewalk outside, the way he stood there for just a beat longer than someone who simply needed to remember where they had parked. Then she had turned back to the register, because there were 3 people in line, and the soup tickets were backing up, and Devin had sent out another wrong side, and she did not have time for anything that was not happening in front of her. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, she had almost stopped thinking about the man in the gray hoodie. Thursday arrived with the particular energy of a Thursday in late autumn, which is to say it arrived gray and determined and indifferent to how anyone felt about it. The diner opened at 6. Renee had been on her feet since 5:45, because she always came in 15 minutes before her shift to do a register count and check the supply levels on her end of the counter, which was not technically her responsibility, but which she did anyway, because the alternative was discovering a shortage mid-rush in front of a line of customers. Devin was already in the kitchen. He had improved in the past week. Not dramatically, not in the way that warranted a speech, but he was reading his tickets more carefully now, and the plates were coming out more consistently, and Renee had noticed that he had started double-checking his sides before sending anything up to the pass-through. She had not said anything to him about this. Some improvements announced themselves better without commentary. Clara came in at 5 to 6 with a travel mug and a story about her car that Renee listened to while checking the receipt paper roll. She murmured in the right places. Clara did not need the full attention of her audience, just the shape of it. The first customers arrived at 6:02, which was also typical. There was a man who came in every weekday at exactly this time. His name was Franklin. He was retired. He took the third booth from the window, and he ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and read an actual paper newspaper, the physical kind, which Renee found quietly remarkable. She always had his coffee there before he finished taking his coat off. Franklin said, as he always said, "You are a wonder, young lady." She said, as she always said, "You are easy to predict, Franklin." He laughed. It was a Thursday morning laugh, genuine but small, the kind that belongs to a person who is glad to be where they are and does not feel the need to perform it loudly. The morning built from there. By 8:30 the counter was full, both front booths were taken, and the kitchen was running at the pace that Devon had not quite been able to sustain 2 weeks ago. He was sustaining it today. Renee noted this without comment, the way she noted everything, stored, filed, periodically reviewed. She was in the middle of processing a card payment for the couple at the end of the counter, when the door scraped open at 11:47. She knew the time because she had just looked at the clock above the coffee station, as she did approximately every 20 minutes, to track the shift and monitor how the rush was holding. She heard the door. She did not look up yet because she was mid-transaction, and the machine was processing, and looking up mid-process was the kind of small rudeness she did not permit herself. The machine finished. She handed back the card. She looked up. A man was standing near the entrance. He was not wearing a gray hoodie today. He was wearing a dark jacket over a collared shirt, and he was not wearing a baseball cap, and he was looking at the room the same way he had looked at the room on Tuesday, with the specific attention of someone who was not here to eat. Renee went still for 1 second in the way that a person goes still when something that was filed in the back of their mind suddenly relocates to the front. It was him, the same man, the gray hoodie man, the 2-hour observer. He was back, and he was not dressed like a person coming in for a cinnamon roll this time, and Renee did not know what he was, but she knew he was something. She did not have time to decide how to feel about this because there was a customer in front of her with a question about whether the quiche had changed, and she said no, same recipe, same as always, and processed the order and moved to the next one. And by the time she looked up again, the man had taken a seat at the counter. Third stool from the left. Same one as Tuesday. She finished the order in front of her. She moved down the counter. She picked up the coffee pot because that was the next thing. Always coffee first, always before the question. And she filled his mug, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and for a single moment, something passed between them that was not quite recognition, because she did not know who he was, but was something adjacent to it. He ordered coffee. He did not order food. He sat. She worked. The rush had not fully broken, and she did not have the attention to spend on the man at stool 3, even if she had wanted to spend it. The next 40 minutes were the kind of 40 minutes that existed in a specific register of controlled urgency. Always one thing almost going wrong. Always another thing being corrected before it became visible. Always the low-grade calculation of who needed what, and in what order, and how to sequence the next 4 actions so that nothing fell. Devon sent up the right plate, then another right plate. She noted this with a quick glance through the pass-through and got back to work. The man at stool 3 sat with his coffee, and did not say anything, and did not look at his phone, and did not pretend to be doing anything other than what he was doing, which was watching. At 12:17 the door opened and a man came in who changed the temperature of the room. It was not dramatic. He was not loud. He was wearing a tie that had been loosened at the collar, and he walked to the counter with the particular walk of someone who was carrying an argument they had already won in their head. He stood at the far end of the register section, and he looked at the menu board above Renee's station, and he said, without looking at her, that he needed to speak to someone about his experience from 2 days ago. Renee moved to him. This was automatic. When someone said experience in that tone, they meant complaint. And a complaint at the register was always better than a complaint that traveled. You received it here, at the counter, and you contained it. She said, of course. Can you tell me what happened? He told her. He had been in on Tuesday. He had ordered the special. The special had not been what he expected, and when he had asked for it to be taken off his bill, his server had offered him a replacement, but had refused the refund. He considered this unacceptable. He wanted a full refund on the meal. He had come back today specifically because the matter had not been resolved to his satisfaction. Renee listened to all of this without interrupting. She listened the way she had learned to listen to complaints, not defensively, not with the immediate internal movement toward a counter-argument, but with the whole of her attention, because people who felt unheard escalated, and people who felt heard often became reasonable. She also noted, while listening, that the meal he was describing had been fully consumed. She had not been there Tuesday afternoon, but she knew the policy, and she knew the ledger, and she knew what a finished plate meant in terms of a refund request. She said, "I hear you, and I'm sorry the meal wasn't what you were expecting. Here is what I'm able to do. I can offer you a replacement meal today, or I can put a credit on a house account for you to use any time. What I'm not able to do is a refund on a meal that has been eaten. That's our policy, and I need to be straight with you about it." He said he was not interested in a replacement. He said he was not interested in a credit. He said he wanted the refund, and he wanted it now, and he wanted to speak to the manager. Renee kept both feet on the floor. She kept her voice at the same level it had been. 8 months of carrying a human being, and 3 hours into a double shift, and she stood exactly as straight as she had been standing at 6 in the morning. She said, "I'm the most senior person here today. The answer I've given you is the answer the manager would give you. I understand if you're frustrated, and you're welcome to contact our customer line. I can write down the number for you. But the refund isn't something I'm able to do." He raised his voice. Not screaming, but raised. The kind of raise that is designed to make a public space feel smaller, to make the person on the other side of it feel like the attention of the room is a punishment they are being given. Renee did not move. She did not look around the room. She did not perform discomfort. She held eye contact with him and she said, once more, clearly, as if she had all the time in the world, and not a full counter waiting behind her, "I am sorry this isn't the answer you wanted. The credit offer stands, if you change your mind." The man stood there for a moment. The moment had a particular quality to it, the quality of a bluff that has been called, but has not yet acknowledged being called. His face moved through a small set of calculations. Then he said something under his breath that did not qualify as a full sentence, and he turned, and he left. The door scraped behind him. Devon had stopped making noise in the kitchen. From somewhere behind her, Devon started a slow, single-handed clap. Without turning around, Renee said, "Get back to work, Devon." Devon got back to work. She turned to the next customer. A woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead who had watched the entire exchange with the expression of someone who had seen something they intended to describe in detail later. Renee said, "What can I get started for you?" The woman ordered a turkey club. The counter kept moving. Renee did not look at the man on stool 3, but she was aware of him the way you are aware of a window in a room, not always looking at it, but always conscious of the light it lets in. She processed 4 more transactions. And then the man on stool 3 stood up. He was taller than she had registered on Tuesday. Or maybe it was the jacket. Or maybe it was the absence of the baseball cap. He stood up from the 3rd stool, and he walked to the end of the counter, where the register was, and he put his hands flat on the counter in front of him, and he looked at her. Renee looked back at him. He said, "How long have you been working here?" She said, 7 months. He said, "And before this?" She said, "Does that matter right now?" He said, "I guess not. My name is Marcus Webb." The name landed the way names sometimes land, quietly, without fanfare, and yet with the specific weight of a thing that changes the shape of everything around it. She had seen the name on the policy binder in the break room. She had seen it on the framed photograph in the hallway, the one taken at the diner's 10th anniversary, a man in an apron standing in front of the pie case with a look of deliberate pride. She had served him coffee twice this morning. She had watched him watch her for 2 hours on Tuesday. She did a quick internal inventory of the morning. The order she had corrected for Devon, the customer she had redirected, the broken coffee pot she had flagged to Clara, rather than attempting to handle herself, the man at the end of the counter, and how she had handled him. All of it had been witnessed. She was not sure how she felt about this. She needed a moment to determine how she felt about this, and she was standing at a register with 3 people behind the man who had just told her his name, and she did not have a moment. So she said,
Hello.
He almost smiled. It did not fully arrive, but the intention was there. He said, "I've been watching this counter since Tuesday morning. I've been doing it once a month for 2 years. I've been meaning to do a proper audit of the hiring from the past quarter, and I didn't get to it in time. And then I sat at that stool and watched everything you did this morning, and I decided I was done not getting to it." She said, "Are you telling me I was being evaluated?" He said, "I'm telling you I watched you work. The evaluation happened on its own." She said, "And?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, and he set it on the counter between them. She looked at it. She looked at him. She picked it up. The paper was a single page, typed, formatted simply. She read it the way she read everything, from the top, without skipping ahead, without allowing herself to form conclusions before she had the full information in front of her. She had learned to do this with apartment leases and employment contracts, and every piece of paper that had ever pretended to be offering something. Her eyes moved down the page. She read the title, Assistant Manager. She read the terms, the hourly rate, which was an increase that her mind registered and then set aside until she had read the rest. The responsibilities, which aligned exactly with what she had already been doing informally for the past 3 months. The scheduling clause, which specified flexibility for medical and personal appointments. She read to the bottom of the page. She looked up. She said, "This is backdated 2 weeks." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because you've been doing this job for longer than today. I was late to the paperwork. The pay shouldn't be late too." She stood with the paper in her hand and looked at it again without really seeing it, because her eyes were doing the thing they occasionally did when something arrived that was both expected and not expected, both deserved and disorienting. She had known, somewhere in the last 3 months, that she was functioning above her job title. She had known because the work she was doing was the work of someone who held more responsibility than her name tag indicated, and she had kept doing it because the alternative was not doing it and things falling apart around her, which was not something she was able to permit. But knowing something and having someone else say it out loud are 2 different experiences. Marcus was still looking at her, not with the particular look of someone waiting to be thanked, with the look of someone who had made a decision and was waiting to see whether the other party agreed. She said, "Does the schedule accommodate prenatal appointments?" He said, "Yes. I'll put it in writing if you'd like." She said, "I would like." He nodded. He took the paper from her hand, drew a pen from his jacket, and on the bottom of the page he wrote, "Scheduling will accommodate medical appointments." He signed it. He handed it back. She read his handwriting. It was the handwriting of a person who had never decided whether to be a printer or a writer, and had arrived at a combination of both. She read the words he had added. She read the signature. She put the paper flat on the counter and she signed it. She pushed it back to him. He folded it and returned it to his jacket pocket. She said, "Thank you." It was a small thank you. Not dramatic, the kind that costs something to produce precisely because it is genuinely meant and genuinely arrived at, and not a performance of gratitude for an audience. He gave a single nod. He said, "I'll set up your system access this afternoon. Gary from District will reach out about the paperwork on his end. You'll have everything you need by tomorrow morning." She said, "All right." He turned to leave. She had 3 people waiting at the register. She called the next one forward and began the transaction, and she did not watch Marcus Webb walk to the door, though she heard the scrape of the hinge when it opened. She processed the order. She printed the ticket. She called it back to the kitchen. Devin confirmed it through the window. She moved to the next customer. That afternoon, Marcus sat in his office above the restaurant supply warehouse, 2 blocks from the diner, and pulled up the personnel file he should have pulled up 7 months ago. He read through it in full. Renee Okafor, 24 years old. Previous employment, 2 years at a coffee shop, concurrent enrollment in a hospitality management certificate program that she had paused 18 months ago. Her application had listed her reason for the pause as personal circumstances. He did not have to guess what personal circumstances meant in the context of a 24-year-old who was now 8 months along and working double shifts. She had been hired as a cashier at standard wage. Her performance reviews, done by the afternoon shift manager on the months they had been done at all, which was not every month. A gap, he also noted, were uniformly positive. Words like reliable and efficient and strong initiative appeared. There were no disciplinary notes. There were no attendance issues. There were 3 shifts she had covered voluntarily when another employee had called out sick. 3 shifts, volunteered, on top of her own schedule. He sat with this for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and called Gary. Gary answered on the second ring, which was typical. Gary considered answering on the first ring to be too eager and on the third ring to be careless. He had mentioned this once and Marcus had filed it under things that were true about Gary. Marcus said, "I need to walk you through a hire I'm formalizing. Assistant manager, Diner 44. Effective 2 weeks ago." There was a pause. Gary said, "2 weeks ago." Marcus said, "I was late on the paperwork." Gary said, "Marcus, you can't just backdate." Marcus said, "I backdated the effective date to match when she began performing the responsibilities of the role. The pay follows the responsibility. That's how I've always run it." Another pause. Then Gary said, "Send me the signed agreement and I'll process it on my end." Marcus said he would. He sent it before the call ended. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the morning. He thought about the man with the tie and how Renee had stood in front of him with her back straight and her voice steady and had said the answer is no in a way that left no room for argument and no visible mark on her composure. He thought about Devon starting to clap. He thought about her voice. "Get back to work, Devon." He thought about the way she had read the contract. Every line, slowly. Not because she was slow, because she was careful. Because she was the kind of person who did not allow herself to be surprised twice by things that were written down. He thought about what that kind of carefulness cost, how it was built, what a person had to experience before reading a piece of paper that slowly became a habit you did not drop. He picked up Zoe from school at 3:15 on the dot. She was standing outside with her backpack and her particular after-school expression, which was the expression of a person who had been in a building for 7 hours and had many opinions about what had happened in it. She got in the car. She buckled her seatbelt. She said, "How was your day?" He said, "Good. Actually good." She said, "Yeah?" He said, "I found someone. At the diner." She said, "Found someone like?" He said, "A really good employee. Someone who had been working very hard without anyone properly noticing." Zoe was quiet for a moment. They pulled out of the school pickup lane. She looked out the window at the street, and then she looked back at him. She said, "Did you fix it?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Good." That was all she said. She turned back to the window and he drove, and the afternoon was gray and ordinary and exactly what it needed to be. A week after the contract was signed, Renee was called into the office that had previously been described to her as the shift manager's office, and that had been redescribed to her, via a brief email from a man named Gary, as her office, effective immediately, to be used for scheduling, ordering, and any administrative work that fell under her new role. The office was a small room off the back hallway. It had a desk with a monitor and a chair that squeaked on the left side when you leaned back. There was a bulletin board on the wall that had a laminated toast guide pinned to it, which she read, and which explained the color she had been aiming for on her own toast, since she was 17, without ever having a name for it. She sat in the chair. The left side squeaked. She pulled up the scheduling software. She had 4 people to redistribute across the next 2 weeks. She had a supply order to review. She had a new hire starting Monday, who had come through onboarding during the previous manager's tenure, and whose file she intended to read completely before the person arrived. She opened the new hire file. She read it from the top. Outside the office, the diner ran. She could hear it without seeing it. The rhythm of the counter, the movement between the kitchen and the service floor, the low continuous sound of a place that was alive and occupied and working. She had spent 7 months being inside that rhythm. She was still inside it. She was just standing in a slightly different position relative to it now. Her phone was on the desk. She had a prenatal appointment on Thursday that she had booked 4 weeks ago, and rebooked twice because of shift coverage. She opened the scheduling software and she blocked the time herself, 2 hours in the middle of the afternoon, and she labeled it medical appointment, and she saved it. No one needed to approve it. That was new. She sat with that for a moment. Then she got back to work. Marcus Webb came into the diner the following Thursday morning, not in a gray hoodie, not at the counter on stool 3 with a baseball cap pulled low. He came in as himself, in his regular jacket, and he walked to the back and knocked on the office door and said, "How is the schedule looking?" She said, "Devin needs more hours. He has improved, and I want to stabilize him before we lose him to somewhere that gives him more shifts." Marcus said, "Done. Anything else?" She said, "The coffee station is running low on one of the backup machines. It is not broken, but it will be soon. I would rather order the part now than replace the machine in 6 months." He said, "I'll call the supplier today." She said, "The number is in the vendor file. 3rd tab." He said, "You already organized the vendor file." She said, "It needed organizing." He stood in the doorway of the office for a moment. She was already looking back at the scheduling screen. He said, "You know you don't have to do everything at once." She said, "I'm aware." He said, "The appointment is on Thursday?" She said, "Yes." He said, "You're covered. Clara and I have it." She looked up then. It was a brief look, the kind that acknowledges something without needing to extend it. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Of course." He left. She turned back to the screen. Outside the office, the diner kept its rhythm. Plates moved. Coffee poured. The door scraped open and scraped shut. Franklin took his booth and read his newspaper. Devin sent up the right plate on the first try. The morning did what the morning always did. It kept going. In the weeks that followed, the staff at Diner 44 adjusted to the new arrangement the way that staffs adjust to things that are, in retrospect, obvious, with a brief period of recalibration, followed by the general sense that things had been this way for longer than they actually had. Clara said, to no one in particular, that she had known something was going to change. Devin said nothing but arrived 5 minutes earlier to his shifts, which said more than anything. The regulars noticed that the operation felt smoother, which regulars always notice, and rarely articulate in those terms. Franklin noticed that his coffee was ready before he sat down, same as always, and that when it was not Renee behind the counter it was someone Renee had trained, which meant the result was the same. He mentioned this to one of the other retired men one morning, in the way that people who observe things carefully eventually get around to saying them out loud. He said, "There is something different about this place lately." The other man said, "Better or worse?" Franklin considered this. He said, "Better. More solid. Like somebody decided to care about the foundation again." That was the word he chose. Foundation. Marcus heard this secondhand from Clara, who had been clearing the next table. He did not mention it to Renee, but he thought about it later, picking up Zoe from school, listening to her describe something that had happened in art class that was clearly more significant to her than she was letting on. He thought about foundation, about what it meant to build something well the first time versus what it meant to rebuild it when you notice the cracks, about the particular kind of person who holds a structure together while the person responsible for the structure is looking somewhere else. He thought about a woman who read contracts line by line before she signed them. He thought about a morning in a gray hoodie, a third stool from the left, and the diner's rhythm finding itself through one person who had never asked to be found. He drove Zoe home. He made grilled cheese without burning it. She told him it was pretty good for someone who was always distracted. He said he was working on the distraction part. She said, "I know. I noticed." And she picked up her fork, and the evening moved forward the way evenings do, quietly, without drama, carrying everything that had happened in it, without needing to announce any of it at all.